The Bible tells us that King Solomon was the wisest man in the whole world, but he was not only the wisest, he was also the richest man in the world. Kings and queens came from all over the world to get Solomon's advice and to admire his riches. In fact, legend has it that Solomon had wives from every nation on earth. And there's no report of any marital disharmony. Not one divorce. Was this a wise man or what? The Bible tells us that when Solomon was just a young man living in the court of King David his father, God told him he would grant him one wish. You know what he wished for? He didn't wish for a kingdom. He didn't wish for great power. He didn't wish for good looks or unlimited pleasure or long life or love or fame or security. Solomon asked God to grant him wisdom. And because he asked for wisdom and none of the other things, God gave him everything else too. The most important difference between you and me and Solomon isn't where or when we were born, or the privileges we have or don't. The difference isn't in our names or our bank accounts, or the positions we hold in life. The difference is Solomon got wisdom by asking God for it. The rest of us must look around us for wisdom, and look for it in everything we read and in everything we do and in everyone we meet. And most of all, we must look for it in ourselves. Perhaps more than any other element of strong character, wisdom is a quality that we must earn and learn on our own. Yes, wisdom is a unique component of character. If you don't have it, nobody can tell you what it is. And if you do have it, probably you'll be wise enough never to say, "I'm a wise person." The wisest man in ancient Greece, the greatest philosopher the world has ever known, was a man named Socrates. In fact, Socrates made wisdom his profession. Philosopher means lover of wisdom in ancient Greek. And because he didn't have another job, people were always asking Socrates, "So what do you do for a living?" He was definitely smart enough to figure out that he had to have an answer, so he made up his own job title, philosopher. But when people asked Socrates, "What is wisdom?" he always gave the same answer, "I don't know." In fact, Socrates never claimed to know much of anything, except how to ask questions. And by asking questions, he would prove to other people that they didn't know what they thought they knew or were certain of. Everybody in Greece agreed that Socrates was the wisest man in Greece. But unlike King Solomon, the philosopher Socrates didn't have great wealth. The wisest man in Greece was poor. King Solomon managed to run a huge household with many wives and homes and lots of children, and he accomplished this without any discord or unhappiness. But Socrates had no home life at all. The wisest man in Greece was married to a famous and terrible nag, and they had no children. Socrates, the wisest man in Greece, just went to the marketplace every day and hung around and asked people questions and hoped to get invited to a banquet so he wouldn't have to go home and face his wife. King Solomon was honored by all the great leaders of his time, but Socrates, the wisest man in Greece, didn't even have any support among the powerful people in his own country. Their sons would go to Socrates and learn what they could from the philosopher, but the powerful families of Athens, the Greek city where Socrates lived, got tired of Socrates' questions. They grew exasperated with the way he was teaching the youth of Greece that nobody knows anything for sure. So they accused the wisest man in Greece of corrupting their children. Instead of honoring the greatest philosopher who ever lived, the Athenians sentenced Socrates to death. Unless he would take back what he taught, unless he would apologize. But Socrates didn't take it back. He didn't apologize. Socrates cheerfully drank down a cup of poison and just sat there calmly saying goodbye to his few faithful students, asking questions the whole time. Solomon and Socrates, two very wise men, but two very different destinies. Great wisdom is no guarantee of anything, but to those who really care about it, wisdom is its own reward. Socrates could have avoided prosecution as a criminal if he had just admitted he was wrong. And you could make a case that agreeing to be executed when you could avoid it by just saying a few words is not very wise, perhaps not even smart. And you'd be right if it were you or me in that position. But it was the right thing to do for Socrates, because Socrates really knew who he was, and he knew that what gave his life meaning and made it worth living was just this manner he had of asking questions and trying to answer them honestly. After all, what would the rest of your life be like if you were to suddenly become dishonest to yourself? After dedicating yourself so long to honesty and wisdom. Socrates knew who he was and what his life meant, and he understood that even one bit of lip service in his last moments would undo all the good and meaningful questions he'd been asking for more than 70 years. Is that wisdom, you may ask once again? And again I would answer with a question. Like Socrates, wisdom for whom? For you and I, or for the wisest man in Greece? What might be wisdom for you and I, who possibly could live quite happily despite knowing that we had compromised our beliefs, would not be wisdom for someone who had totally dedicated himself to seeking the truth. Know thyself was Socrates' motto. He knew himself well enough to realize that he had to drink that cup of poison, and his character was strong enough so that he was actually able to do it. I know a few people who make their livings as personal financial planners. They help individuals and families define their financial needs today and in the coming years, and they help people do what must be done to provide for those needs. Any good personal financial planner will tell you that most people are insufficiently prepared for retirement. And I would add that this lack of preparedness is not limited to the financial sphere. Because for a mature human being, there has got to be some higher value or higher truth than just staying on in life, just catching a few more gasps of air, or even having a large enough retirement income so you can spend your final years on the golf course. In my work, I've talked a lot about what conclusions you should draw if you're not wealthy by the time you're 50 or 60 years of age. How it's an indication of poor planning or poor self-management. But if you're 50 or 60 and you haven't really thought about what more there is, or who you are, and why you're here, and what your life means, well, you just haven't provided for your old age. Don't worry about a financial planner. You need a personal wisdom consultant. Part of wisdom is knowing what you lack and looking for it and asking for it. Another part of wisdom is knowing, at the same time as you ask, that there are no final answers. There are always more questions. There are always more things and people you don't now know and haven't yet heard of or seen. So you may have that retirement package. You may have the medical benefits, the pension, the Sunbelt home, and a steady income you can live on. What good is it if you're isolated? And I don't mean just physically alone. I mean isolated from a real sense of connection with what's come before and with what lies ahead. It's here that wisdom provides very real, very practical benefits. It's wisdom that provides a sense of life's value and assurance that all the effort has been worthwhile. There's no question that we must take care of our material needs, but a fulfilled life requires meaning as well as substance. Wisdom is the fruit of experience. Experience